The morning sun filtered through the canopy of ancient pines, casting dappled shadows across the narrow trail. Sarah adjusted her backpack straps and breathed in the crisp mountain air, feeling the stress of city life melt away with each step. Beside her, Mark consulted his GPS device for the third time in 10 minutes. "According to this, we should reach the overlook by noon," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the unusual stillness. "Perfect spot for lunch." Sarah nodded, though something felt off about the forest around them. The silence was too complete. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even their footsteps seemed muffled, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. "Did you notice there are no tracks?" Sarah pointed to the pristine dirt path ahead of them. "No hikers, no animals. Nothing." Mark laughed, but it sounded forced. "Maybe we're just the first ones out today. Early bird gets the worm, right?" They'd been planning this anniversary hiking trip for months. 3 days in the remote Blackwood Mountains. Just the two of them reconnecting with nature and each other. Sarah was the adventurous one, always pushing for new experiences, while Mark preferred his adventures well-researched and mapped. Their differences usually balance each other out, but today she found his constant GPS checking oddly unsettling. As they rounded a bend, an old wooden sign came into view, weathered and barely legible. "Warning: trail conditions unstable. Hikers proceed at own risk. Report to ranger station before proceeding." "That's weird," Sarah frowned. "The ranger station was closed when we passed it this morning." Mark waved dismissively. "Probably just bureaucratic red tape. The trail looks fine to me." But as they continued deeper into the woods, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. By midday, the oppressive quiet had begun to wear on both of them. Mark had given up pretending everything was normal, constantly glancing over his shoulder and jumping at every shadow. Sarah, despite her usual confidence, found herself walking closer to him than she normally would. "Remember what that gas station attendant said this morning?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the past hour. Mark's jaw tightened. "You mean the crazy old guy who told us to stay on the marked path and don't listen to the voices?" "Come on, Sarah. Every small town has its local character spinning ghost stories for the tourists." "Maybe. But did you see his face when we mentioned Blackwood Trail specifically?" He went white as a sheet. "Coincidence." They stopped for lunch at what should have been the scenic overlook, but the view was obscured by an unseasonably thick fog that had rolled in from nowhere. As they ate their sandwiches in the gray gloom, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench. "Mark, look at your GPS." He pulled out the device, and his face went pale. The screen showed them in the middle of a blank area. No trails, no landmarks, no indication of where they were supposed to be. "It's probably just a mountain interference," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "These things aren't perfect." Sarah pulled out her phone. No signal, not even one bar. "We should head back," she said quietly. "We've only been hiking for 4 hours. We can't turn around every time." A sound cut through the fog, distant but unmistakably human. A voice calling, though they couldn't make out the words. "Hello," Mark shouted back. "Is someone there?" The voice came again, closer this time, but something about it made Sarah's skin crawl. It sounded wrong somehow, like an echo of an echo. "That's not a person," Sarah whispered. "Don't be ridiculous." But Mark's hand found hers anyway, and his palm was slick with sweat. They packed up quickly and continued down what they hoped was still the main trail, though the fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The voice continued to call out periodically, sometimes from their left, sometimes from their right, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind them. "Help us," the voice would whisper. "This way, come this way. It's leading us off the trail," Sarah said, noticing how the voice always seemed to call from directions that would take them away from the path. "Or maybe it's trying to guide us back to safety," Mark countered, though he sounded less sure with each repetition. As afternoon wore into evening, they realized they were completely lost. The trail had vanished entirely, leaving them stumbling through increasingly dense underbrush. Worse, Mark's GPS had begun showing impossible readings, sometimes indicating they were moving in circles, sometimes that they were somehow walking through solid rock. They made camp in a small clearing as darkness fell, neither wanting to admit how frightened they'd become. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing glimpses of stars, but the forest around them felt alive with malevolent presence. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered as they huddled in their tent. A sound like footsteps circled their campsite, just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. Whatever was making the noise was trying to be quiet, but occasionally a twig would snap or leaves would rustle. "Probably just a deer," Mark said, but he gripped his flashlight like a weapon. Then came the whispers. At first, they thought it might be the wind, but the words became gradually clearer. Their names, spoken in voices that sounded almost like their own. "Sarah, Mark, come out, come play." "That's not possible," Mark breathed. The whispers grew more insistent, more numerous, until it sounded like dozens of voices calling to them from the darkness. Sarah recognized some of the voices, her sister, her mother, friend from back home, but twisted somehow, made hollow and hungry. Neither of them slept that night. Dawn brought little relief. The whispers had stopped with the sunrise, but the forest around them looked different in the daylight. Darker somehow, with trees that seemed to lean inward, creating a canopy so thick that the morning light barely penetrated. "Look at this," Sarah called out, her voice tight with fear. She was standing beside a large pine tree, staring at something carved into the bark. Mark hurried over and felt his heart sink. Scratched deep into the wood were dozens of names, dates going back decades, and desperate messages. Jenny, 1987. "They won't let me leave." Tom and Lisa, 1994. "The voices are getting louder." David Park, 2003. "Don't trust the trail markers." Amanda Foster, 2018. "If you find this, tell my family I'm sorry. These are missing persons cases," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember reading about some of these people, experienced hikers who just vanished." Mark was frantically trying his GPS again, but the device had gone completely dead. Even worse, when he checked his watch, it showed a time that couldn't be right. According to it, they'd been in the woods for over a week. "We need to get out of here. Now." Sarah started walking in what she hoped was the direction they'd come from. But after an hour of hiking, they found themselves back at the same tree with the carved names. That's when they noticed the fresh carving at the bottom. "Sarah and Mark, 2025. We should have listened." The letters were still bleeding sap, as if they'd just been cut. "We didn't carve that," Mark said, stating the obvious. "Then who did?" They tried every direction, but each path led them back to the same tree, the same clearing, the same growing sense of desperation. The forest had become a maze with no exit, and something was playing with them, hurting them like animals. On their second night lost, things escalated. Sarah woke to find Mark's sleeping bag empty. She called his name, but only heard that horrible echo effect, her own voice distorted and played back to her from the darkness. "Mark, where are you? Where are you?" the forest whispered back in her voice. She grabbed her flashlight and stumbled out of the tent, sweeping the beam frantically through the trees. The light caught something white moving between the trunks, a figure in what looked like hiking clothes. "Mark!" She ran toward it, but as she got closer, she realized the figure was wrong. Too tall, moving in a way that suggested joints bending in directions they shouldn't, and the clothes it wore were rotted, decades old. The thing turned toward her, and Sarah saw a face that had once been human but was now something else entirely. Hollow eye sockets and skin like bark. When it spoke, it used Mark's voice. "Sarah, help me. I'm lost." She ran. For hours she crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes and skin, her flashlight beam dancing wildly through the trees. Behind her, she could hear pursuit, not just one thing, but many, calling to her in the voices of everyone she'd ever loved. "Sarah, where are you going?" Her mother's voice. "Don't leave us behind." Her sister. "Please, we just want to help." Mark, or the thing wearing his voice. When exhaustion finally forced her to stop, she found herself back at the clearing, back at the tree. A new message had appeared. "Mark, 2025, she left me behind." Sarah collapsed against the tree, sobbing. She'd lost track of how long she'd been running, how long she'd been in these woods. Her watch had stopped working. Her phone was dead, and she was beginning to suspect that time itself worked differently here. As the sun set on what might have been her third day lost, or her 30th, she heard Mark's voice calling to her again. This time, she didn't run. "Sarah, thank God, I found you." Mark emerged from the tree line, but Sarah could see immediately that something was wrong. His clothes were clean, his face unmarked by the branches that had torn at hers. He moved with a strange, fluid grace that reminded her of the things she'd seen the night before. "Where have you been?" she asked quietly. "I've been looking everywhere for you. I woke up and you were gone. Your tent was shredded to pieces, like something had attacked it." Sarah looked back at her tent. It was intact. "That's not true." "Sarah, you're confused. You've been alone out here for days. Look at yourself." She looked down at her hands and saw that they were covered in dirt and scratches she didn't remember getting. Her clothes were torn, her backpack was missing, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten or drunk water. "The trail is right over there," Mark continued, pointing. "I can see the ranger station from here. We can be back to the car in an hour." Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to follow him out of this nightmare. But she remembered the thing wearing hiking clothes, the way it had moved, the hollow eyes. "What's my middle name?" she asked. Mark smiled, but the expression looked wrong on his face. "What kind of question is that?" It's... The smile faltered. "You're testing me. What did we talk about at lunch yesterday?" "Sarah, you're scaring me. You haven't eaten anything in days. You're hallucinating." She backed away from him, and his face began to change, features shifting subtly, becoming less familiar. "Don't run from me again. Sarah, I've been so lonely without you." Sarah ran again, but this time she knew the truth. She'd been running for much longer than she'd realized. The forest was alive, feeding on lost hikers, keeping them wandering in circles until they gave up hope and joined whatever collective consciousness lived in these woods. The voices she heard weren't just random sounds. They were the other victims, absorbed into the forest's hungry awareness, used as bait to lure in new prey. She found evidence of her previous attempts to escape, abandoned campsites she didn't remember making, messages carved in trees in her own handwriting, warning future versions of herself about the tricks the forest would play. Don't trust Mark. It's not him. The trail markers move when you're not looking. Count your steps. If you take more than 1,000 without seeing something new, you're walking in circles. The voices know everything you know. Don't listen. How many times had she been through this cycle? How many times had she run from the thing wearing Mark's face, only to forget and trust it again? She found her backpack hanging from a branch 20 feet off the ground. Inside was a journal filled with her handwriting, documenting days or weeks or months of failed escape attempts, growing desperation, and the slow realization that she might never leave these woods. The final entry, in handwriting that looked increasingly unhinged, read, "Day? I understand now. The forest doesn't want us to leave because it's lonely. It's been alone for so long, feeding on the occasional lost hiker, that it's forgotten how to let go. Mark is gone, really gone, but I keep seeing him because the forest learned his shape from my memories. It's trying to comfort me the only way it knows how, by showing me what I want to see. But the comfort is a trap. If I give in, if I stop fighting, I'll become part of it too. My voice will join the chorus, calling to the next lost souls. I have to find a way out before I forget who I am completely." On what Sarah hoped was her last night in the forest, she made a decision. Instead of running when Mark appeared, and he did appear, just as the journal had predicted, she sat and waited. "Sarah, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." "I know," she said calmly. "You always are." Mark's face flickered, uncertainty crossing his features. "What do you mean? You're not Mark. Mark is dead, isn't he? You absorbed him like you absorbed all the others." The thing wearing Mark's face sat down across from her. For a moment, its features shifted, becoming less defined, more like a reflection on disturbed water. "I am Mark," it said, but the voice was different now. Older, layered with the echoes of dozens of other voices. "I am all of them. They live in me now. They're not gone, Sarah. They're home. But they're not free. Freedom is overrated. The forest spoke through Mark's mouth. Out there, you were alone. Here, you'll never be alone again. You'll be part of something greater, something that has existed since these mountains were young. Sarah felt the temptation, the loneliness of her normal life, the stress, the uncertainty. All of it could end. She could join Mark, really join him, and never have to face the world's disappointments again. "Show me," she said. The forest around her began to change. The trees straightened, their branches interweaving into a cathedral of living wood. Lights flickered between the leaves, not electric lights, but something warmer, more alive. And there were people there, dozens of them, all the hikers who had disappeared over the decades. They looked happy, peaceful, their faces glowing with an inner light. Mark walked toward her, but now she could see through him to the others: Jenny, Tom and Lisa, David Park, Amanda Foster, all of them reaching out to welcome her home. "You see," Mark said, "no more pain, no more loneliness, no more fear." Sarah took a step toward them, then stopped. "What about the people who love me? My family, my friends? They'll forget in time, and if they come looking, they'll find you." That's when Sarah understood the true horror of the place. It didn't just trap individuals. It consumed entire networks of love and connection, pulling in anyone who cared enough to search for the missing. "No," she said. Mark's face contorted with something that might have been rage or might have been despair. "You can't leave, Sarah. No one leaves." "Then I'll be the first." The helicopter found Sarah 3 days later, dehydrated and delirious, wandering along a highway 15 miles from where she and Mark had planned to hike. She kept mumbling about voices in the woods and warning rescuers not to look for Mark in the forest. Search teams scoured the Blackwood Mountains for weeks, but found no trace of Mark or their campsite. Sarah's story kept changing. Sometimes she said Mark had fallen from a cliff, sometimes that he'd been attacked by a wild animal, sometimes that he'd simply vanished in the night. The psychiatrist said it was trauma-induced amnesia, complicated by exposure and dehydration. Her family was just grateful she'd survived. But Sarah never forgot the real truth. She never forgot the choice she'd made, or the sound of Mark's voice calling to her as she walked away from the forest's embrace. She never forgot the journal she'd written and left behind, or the warnings carved in trees that would fade over time until the next hiker arrived. Most importantly, she never went hiking alone again, because sometimes late at night when the wind was just right, she could still hear the voices calling from the distant mountains. And sometimes she could swear one of them sounded like Mark, still trying to bring her home. The Blackwood Trail was officially closed 6 months later, after 2 more hikers disappeared within a week of each other. But the forest doesn't need official trails to find what it's looking for. It only needs people foolish enough to wander where they don't belong. And it's always patient, always hungry, always waiting.